Hi, hello, I hope you're taking care of yourself. If you're new here, my name is Lexi, and today we're going to be talking about all of the books that I read in March and April, which is really just all of the books I read in April because my spirit was kind of broken for a little while there. Still is, for the record, but I've managed to swing that pendulum back a little bit. I've been able to read a lot more these last couple of weeks, which has been really nice. I don't really know how long this trough is going to last for me in my mental health, this period of but hobbies have definitely helped, so take it from me. Books will still be there when you feel slightly more capable and slightly less like a sad and frustrated little lizard. They will wait for you and they won't have any opinions because they're actually not sentient at all. So do what you gotta do to make it through the day until then, and just try not to make yourself feel too guilty about it. Anyways, I have 12 books to report this time, truly all over the place in terms of genre. I have no reasons to read what I read or say what I say or be how I am. Honestly, I'm just a senseless and chaotic being in this world, but this wrap up is not senseless and it is not chaotic. As always, I'm going to be going mostly chronologically with no spoilers, although if you truly want to know nothing at all about the books that you read, I do give back of the book style summaries and then also my vague reactions and responses and feelings to what happens in the book, but nothing that I personally would consider spoilers. But keep that in mind if you're sensitive to that, because I'm also sensitive and I don't like it when people yell at me in my comments. It makes me feel very sad. But yeah, that's the preamble. I'm sure you're so excited, but before we get into it, I do have a real quick word from today's sponsor, which is Care Of. It should be obvious to anybody with eyes and ears that I am not doing very well right now. And unfortunately, one of the first things to go when I'm going through any kind of significant life stress is my ability to take care of myself through meals and sleeping consistently and just all of the things that I tend to take for granted when I'm not going through it. But thankfully, I have recently incorporated Care Of into my routine, and don't get me wrong, it hasn't fixed me. It hasn't just solved all of my problems, but it has been really, really nice to look after my health in a way that doesn't feel completely overwhelming. Care Of is a health and wellness company that delivers personalized vitamins and supplements directly to your door every single month. They come in these cute little packages with little quotes or facts on them, and I have just been throwing 1 or 2 of these into my bag every day, so that way wherever I am, wherever it is that I'm eating a meal, because I like taking them with a meal, I can just grab this from my purse and it slots into whatever I'm doing. I am currently taking a multivitamin, magnesium, and cranberry extract, and look, I'm not a doctor, I'm not an expert, I don't know what's going to work for you or what your body might need, but speaking from solely my experiences, taking these supplements every day has made me feel so much more energized and just capable of walking around the world, to the point where it's a little bit embarrassing that I needed this much and that my diet has been this atrocious. But if you have no idea at all where to start, you can also take a personalized quiz on their website. It only takes like 5 minutes or so. That will help you start to explore which of their options might work well for you. So if you would like to give Care Of a try, you can head on over to takecareof.com and use the code NewlyNova50 to get 50% off your first subscription order. Or you can click the link in my description and do exactly the same thing, or you can click this incredibly convenient QR code that is just floating right here. All of them will take you to Care Of's website, so I strongly recommend that. Thank you so much to Care Of for sponsoring today's video. I really appreciate it. Let's get back to it. Okay, cool. Let's get started. The first book I finished way back at the beginning of March was Twisted Lies by Anna Huang. I started this book like 6 months ago, but then got distracted and came back to it and got distracted again and came back to it again, but now we're done. We made it. This is the last book in the Twisted series, and it is a landlord romance between Stella, who is an influencer who is trying to start her own fashion line, and then this guy named Christian, who is basically like Alex Volkov from Twisted Love, but in bold and underlined font. Like, he is somehow even more psychotic, which I really did think peaked in the first book of the series, but I guess I was wrong. And the two of them have to fake date for reasons that are tenuous at best, and also Stella hilariously has a stalker that her other stalker, her fake boyfriend Christian, he has to outstalk the stalker in order to protect her, because that's just how it goes sometimes. Overall, it's pretty similar in vibe to the first book, just in terms of general insanity. It's got an antagonist who unironically tells this woman, "If I can't have you, no one can," like he's some kind of Machiavellian cartoon supervillain. It's got on-page torture and murder just to prove how devoted of a man Christian is. How cool. It's got this ridiculous grand finale plot where like all of the Infinity Stones from the rest of the series all come together in this bizarre conclusion that involves a painting and this man's tortured past. It's a lot. There's a lot going on, but also somehow nothing at all. It's one of those books. But honestly, for the most part, I found this to be pretty entertaining. Don't get me wrong, it's easily like 150 pages too long. Like, I feel like I could have ripped out entire chapters and then rebound the book and you wouldn't know. That's how much nonsense is going on inside of here. But despite that, I feel like it regained a lot of the flavor and the zane that the first book in the series had and that the second book in the series absolutely did not. And I ended up giving it 2 stars, which is maybe too nice, but just the dopamine of finally finishing this series was cruising through my brain. But obviously it's still pretty tough. Like, I cannot abide by men who have inner worlds like this. It is a gift for Christian in this book to be simultaneously this crazy and this cringe. Honestly, he should start a webinar just to share it with the world. world. Before you ask, I have no idea if I'm going to end up doing any more videos on the series. I just have a lot of mixed feelings on the series overall. Like, this one had tea again, this one was interesting, but the middle two, I just don't know if they had enough content to justify a movie-length excavation of everything inside of them. I don't know, we'll see. Those videos are a lot of work, so I only like doing them for books where I feel substantially inspired, and that could happen for this, it could happen for a different book, it could happen for something entirely unrelated. But one thing about me is I will continue to be insane on Maine, so stay tuned for more on that. But speaking of my long and tumultuous adventures through literature, the next book that I read after that was Beautiful Disaster by Jamie McGuire, which spawned yet another 2 to 3 week period in which I was completely detached from the rest of my life, from my friends, my loved ones, my reality as I once knew it, all in the name of a silly little YouTube video. And I will spare you from revisiting very much of that, because if you want my expanded thoughts, then I have over 2 hours of them, just 1 or 2 clicks away from where you are right now. But this book is a bad boy x good girl, except also kind of not really, romance novel that follows this guy named Travis, who is a tattooed, edgy, motorcycle riding prize fighter. He's in a fight club, and he becomes obsessed with this girl named Abby, who is a directionless college freshman. No real personality. She's kind of empty inside, other than hating women and her father. But she, of course, has a dark past that comes back and complicates their relationship. And really, that's the entire book. That's everything that you need to know. I read this based off of an email recommendation, which that's something I'd never done before, but it was still pretty exciting for me. It just really feels like you've made it on this platform when you receive your first anonymous tip about smut. It's toxic in this almost all-American kind of way. Like, I remember when I was scripting, I was on Goodreads, and I saw a review that was like, if I wanted to look at this kind of toxicity, I would just look at my parents' marriage. And the laugh that I laughed, that just escaped me like a demon, because it's so true. Like, yes, weird things happen inside of this book, but mostly the two of them are awful in a way that feels almost attainable to mortals like you and me, which makes this book especially the worst, because when this was released, you have so many people who were like, could I please just have one Travis? Just one for a good girl like me? I just want to be loved how he loves Abby, as if he does not kidnap her and punch mirrors and kick down doors. And that makes it worse to me than the likes of One Direction bought me, or my mom sold me off to this mafia man. What do I do about that? Because there's this weird realism to it that I just absolutely despise. And on top of that, I also hated everything else about this book. I hated the choreographed musical performance that he does for her inside of the cafeteria. I hated her absolutely satanic best friend who wanted nothing more in this world than for Abby to suffer. I hated that the author named a character Shepley, and it somehow wasn't even the worst name inside of the entire book. There was a lot of material here. It was gold for that kind of video, I think. Yeah, I gave this 1 star. It's not the worst thing I've read in my life, but it was close, and that is an honor and a privilege given what I choose to subject myself to on the internet. Next up, while working on that video, the last book that I read before my spirit was broken and I forgot what books were for a little while was She Gets the Girl. I did not stop reading because this book was bad. Let's start there. I actually gave this 4 stars. I really liked it. This is a sapphic young adult rom-com that follows Alex and Molly. Alex is this kind of skater energy, like she has no skateboard, it's just her vibe, but she's a cool girl. She's street smart, she's independent, and Molly could not be more different from that. She's this neurotic, super socially awkward, but well-intentioned nerd. And they're both college freshmen, and they meet and they become friends because Alex is trying to prove to her long-distance girlfriend that she can handle it, and she's not just going to flake and flirt with other women in college. And she decides, for some reason, that the perfect way to do this would be to help wingman Molly and to set her up with her long-term crush, whose name is Cora. And if Alex can do this, if she can set them up, then it will prove to her girlfriend that she is serious, I guess. I mean, that's sure what she thinks. Anyways, the catch with all of that, obviously, is that Alex and Molly are the 2 main characters of this book, and this is their love story, so obviously some hijinks ensue to get them to that point, but it's just really cute. And apparently word on the street is that this is based on the actual love story of the 2 women who wrote the book and how they got together in college, which I absolutely adore. I think that is so fucking cute that they ended up writing this book together. When I was reading this, I kept thinking that it reminded me so strongly of a particular romantic comedy, but then after I was done with the book, I tried to figure out what movie it was, and I absolutely could not. So I don't know if that's real or if it's just something that I made up because the book kind of just felt like a rom-com, because either way, that is the vibe of this book. It's got a movie-style premise, it's got great banter, it's got that slow, budding yearning that you know watching is happening, but that the characters themselves are not acknowledging, and it's just a really good time overall. The only thing I didn't love was that the ending sequence kind of felt rushed to me. Like, the rest of the book is pretty slow burn, but then we get a sequence that's just boom, 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 everything happening all at once, and then the book is kind of just over. And I wish that we'd gotten a little bit more time to sit with the resolution, maybe a little bit more fluff at the end as a treat. But yeah, still recommends for sure, especially if you're looking for a good depression read, if you're feeling like the world is a cold and mean place and you just want to see some people be happy, this might be very good for you. And especially also, if you're looking for a queer book where the characters do not have to deal with coming out or with homophobia, like there's still drama for sure, they have things going on, but there are other problems in their lives. After that, I started the vlog that I put up a few days ago, which is still probably quite fresh, so I'll keep this pretty fast for you guys. But the first book I finished for that, with a whole month, by the way, in between this and She Gets the Girl, was Five Survive by Holly Jackson. This one is about these 6 friends who are all on vacation together. They're driving this massive RV down to like Louisiana or something. And when they're driving in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, suddenly the RV breaks down. And everybody has secrets, and somebody out there in the dark obviously wants something from them. It's all very spooky and mysterious. And that's where the story really kicks off. My expectations for this book were like extremely low going into it, honestly, as were my expectations for myself to ever finish a book again. So it did what I needed it to do. It was interesting enough for me to crank through it. It was fast paced, it had things going on, it had tension. The ending was ridiculous. Like, it was so out of left field. No realism at all to be seen, really, but I still found it to be entertaining at the end of the day. I truly do not believe that after finishing this wrap up, I will ever fire a neuron for this book ever again. Like, nothing about it was particularly memorable to me, but that's okay. I didn't need something that was super memorable. I needed something that would remind me why reading can be fun, and this definitely did that. I'm thankful for its service towards that goal, and I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. It's not going to knock your socks off. I feel like it probably had more problems in its execution than I was able to conceive of at the time that I read it, but it did what it said it would do on the tin, so thumbs up from me. Next up for that video, I read Powerless, and this is a young adult fantasy book that has really blasted off this year. It is about this girl named Peyton who has no superpowers in this world where if you don't have superpowers, you're gonna have a really bad time, and she's managing an existence for herself when she ends up having this run-in with this tall, dark, handsome, tortured prince, and the both of them are drafted to compete in the Trials, which is this super ambiguous, almost Hunger Games style competition where maybe she'll die, maybe not, nobody really knows for sure, and this did not work for me, unfortunately. I always kind of hate it whenever I dislike a book that has this many really earnest fans, because I never want to make anybody feel bad or dumb or silly for liking something. I feel like the world does enough of that already without me fanning those flames, and I don't want to talk you out of enjoying something that makes you happy, so keep that in mind. This is just my opinion, but I don't know how to do anything except shoot straight on this channel, so I found this to be really shallow. I thought that the world was incredibly half-baked. It kind of felt like a low-resolution collage of a bunch of other popular young adult fantasy books, which that's not a deal breaker for me. I like a lot of those books, but I didn't feel like this brought anything fresh to the table. And the writing was just in a style that I could not get past. It's overwritten in this weird by-the-book way with a bunch of like ham-fisted alliteration and metaphors that are strangely tossed in. I don't know, it wasn't for me. I talk about that a lot more specifically in the vlog, but overall I ended up giving this 2 stars because it's not all bad. I feel like there were moments where I felt like it had the skeleton to be a book that I would really enjoy. There were parts of the main relationship that were compelling, but just the execution did not really hit for me. Like, I didn't talk about this in the vlog, but there's a major twist towards the end of the book that is clearly supposed to be sad. And when I say I felt nothing, like the Arctic tundra, that was my heart reading this scene. And that's not at all a reflection of how I'm doing right now. Like, it's actually way easier than it normally is to make me cry. I feel like I've been very emotionally dysregulated. So it just goes to show how disconnected I felt by the end of this. Just not for me, unfortunately. But the last book that I read for that vlog, my 5-star, was Notes on an Execution, and I really did unpack exactly what I liked about this in that video, so I will again direct you there for my expanded thoughts. But really quickly, the plot. You have a serial killer, his name is Ansel, and he is on death row, and his execution is scheduled for the current day that this book takes place. And the book tells the story of how he got there, basically, how he became what he became, except it's told largely from the perspectives of the women in his life who were impacted by his actions. This book has suspense, it has some mystery elements, but I definitely think it hedges still more into being literary fiction in terms of tone and style. It's very vibey and pensive and atmospheric, and I absolutely loved this. I devoured it in maybe a 4 or 5 hour period in which not a muscle was moved except to go get dinner. Strongly recommend if you like stories about fractured morality, about the gray areas between good and evil, about grief, about justice, prison reform, the ethics of true crime, any of those buzzwords and or any related buzzwords. If you like reading about them, I think that you will probably like reading this. So give it a go. This is one of the first books I've read this year that I know will be on my year-end favorites list, and that is very high praise coming from me. I am like exceedingly picky with 5-star books. After that, after I was free of my reading slump and also that video, I ended up picking up Someone Who Will Love You in All Your Damaged Glory, and this is a short story collection that is by the creator of BoJack Horseman that revolves around relationships and love and mental health and just really overall similar things to the TV show, honestly. And the stories frequently lean into being quite weird. Like, my favorite, I think, in the collection was pretty early on, and it's called A Most Blessed and Auspicious Occasion. And the way that it's written reminds me so strongly of listening to Welcome to Night Vale in 2015. Like, it's about this couple who are getting married in this weird alternate version of reality that is basically us, except with the addition of all of these bizarre traditions, like sacrificing a bunch of goats to the stone god and having this choir that is traditional to have at every wedding that will just randomly start shrieking for extended periods of time, and just a bunch of other really weird shit inside of this otherwise normal contemporary story about a couple that is running into some roadblocks planning their wedding. And I loved it. I loved Night Vale when I was a teenager, and that's the vibe of the story. And the rest of the collection is not that particular brand of weird, but it's still pretty odd. It plays with perspective and with form in a variety of different ways. I think that there are definitely some stories that are stronger than others, like some feel a lot more fragmented, some go on for too long, in my opinion. But overall, no like massive misses. I definitely enjoyed reading the entire collection, so I ended up giving it 4 stars. It's not going to change your whole life, but if you want something that is earnest and sweet and weird a little bit in how it looks at loneliness and at love, I think that you could really enjoy this. I think it might be worth a go. Next, I picked up The Spear Cuts Through Water, and I promised somebody that I would read this book like 6 months ago, and it's just been staring up at me from my shelf ever since. And this was so good. I'm honestly embarrassed that I put it off for so long because it's such a banger. This book follows 2 men. One of them is this former soldier who regrets a lot of his past actions, and then the other is kind of just a guy, a nomad sort of dude who's trying to find his place in the world, and they both get swept up into going on this quest to bring the Empress, who is also the moon, like she fell out of the sky and then became the Empress and was locked up by successive generations of emperors, but she was the moon before all of that, so she has all of these powers. That's the Empress, and she breaks out of containment finally, except she's very old and very frail, so these 2 guys have to bring her to the coast, where she will serve a crucial role in the revolution, because the Emperor and his 3 sons, they're all the fucking worst. They're despots, they have no regard for the health and the happiness of the common man, they have special powers and use them to do bad things for fun because they're the worst, and everybody hates them and wants to overthrow them, but the entire plan hinges on these 2 guys getting the Empress to the coast. So that is, in broad strokes, what's going on, but that doesn't even really give you an idea of what this book actually is, because it's written almost like an oral history, where it's mostly in 3rd person, but interwoven into the narrative are these 1st-person segments that are the thoughts and the feelings of different random, sometimes unnamed characters. And they're punchy and they're tragic, and they really drive home the idea that this is the story of an entire nation of people who are all rising up in revolt. And then also, as an additional layer, stay with me, because there's a 3rd main character who is this unnamed narrator that's written in 2nd person. And they appear to be from the modern world and are watching a theatrical play rendition of this quest that I told you about. And they also chime in with their own feelings and anecdotes, because the main story inside of this book is portrayed to be their ancestral history. So sometimes, altogether, when you're reading this book, you will get paragraphs that are 3rd person, but they're really being performed on a stage, watched by somebody who is in 2nd person, but with the thoughts of random side characters sprinkled in as well in 1st person. And I am sure that I'm making this book sound so confusing right now, but dude, I swear on my life, it works, okay? It has no right to work. Like, it should be the worst as an experience. It should be incredibly confusing, but Simon pulled it together. I had no trouble at all following what was going on, despite how ambitious the story was. And all of that gives this book this cinematic flavor. Like, I have maybe never read something that I feel would translate this well into a prestige miniseries on HBO Max. Just in terms of the way that the story is structured, like the breakneck pacing and the twists and the turns and the characters, the flashbacks, just how it's all woven together, it would slap as a TV show. And also the writing is so good. It's got this beautiful, almost folkloric vibe to it, and it reads like art. It does. Like, here's a random one-off quote towards the beginning of the book. "It is an agitating sensation, almost pleasurable, the feeling of coming up to a steep and impenetrable deadline. It puts you in the mind of the egg timer, which was your Lola's favorite toy. She used that cranked ovoid contraption when she steeped her tea. She used it when she baked with the clay oven. She used it to startle you awake from a nap. When you think of the egg timer, you think of old hands, white-knuckled, winding the spring. You think of tension wire, held at a gasp between 2 opposing poles. You think of its insides ticking away, a sound that has never left you, just as she has never left you. You hear it now, in this very theater, distant but unmistakable, the clicking of its aluminum tongue, the tapping of this moonlit body's foot. We wait." For context, that is the 2nd person main character just chiming in randomly during a scene where the 2 actual main characters are running out of time. And because of this, you feel it. You feel this egg timer inside of your head ticking and ticking and ticking as you reach the end of the chapter and as the book is becoming more and more tense. And I loved it. I thought this was absolutely fantastic. In a lot of respects, it's a typical quest fantasy, but it's just told in a way that is entirely fresh. It's also gritty, like it's violent. Crazy shit is happening all of the time inside of this book. I feel like a weaker author genuinely would have spun this this idea into a 4-book series, but Simon said no, we will do this all in one go. And it works. It doesn't feel rushed at all. It just feels full and substantial, if that makes sense. And thematically, the ways that it ties in feelings of identity and connection to culture and ancestral history and just the stories that are passed down through generations of immigrant families, it's incredible. Just such a cool book. With all of that said, I thought that this was going to be a 5-star book for maybe the first 60% or so, but I ended up giving it 4.5 stars instead. 2 small grievances and reasons for that. First, there's a section around the 2/3 mark or so that is just very slow, and it felt kind of disjointed from the rest of the book in terms of pacing. Like, it was the only time reading this that I felt even kind of bored. It's not bad, it just kind of took me out of it a little bit. And then number 2, the climax of the book had this component that took itself extremely seriously, but I could not see as anything other than a little bit silly. It was just too zany in an otherwise quite grounded fantasy story. Like, it's very magical, there's a lot going on inside of here, but everything feels very earned, except for what happens kind of towards the end with the big boy. You know, it was a lot. But with that said, the resolution right after that climax, fantastic. I loved it. It was the perfect way for the story to end. And overwhelmingly, this is so worth the read if you love epic fantasy or if you just want a really unique spin on the classic kind of hero's journey. I don't think that this book is for everybody. I don't think it's written really to have mass appeal. Like, it's definitely a very arty and ambitious project. But if you like books that make very brave structural choices like I do, I think that you're going to find this to be fantastic. Okay, that was kind of a long one. I had a lot to say about that book. But after that, I read Stay True. Very different. This is a memoir that is about the author growing up in the 1990s and going to college. And when he's there, he meets his best friend, Ken, and the two of them kind of just grow up a lot together until during, I think, his junior or maybe senior year, Ken is murdered completely senselessly during a carjacking, and Hua is kind of just left to pick up the pieces of that and deal with his grief. The things I liked about this came as a surprise to me, honestly. I really think that this book captures well the narcissism that you kind of have when you're like 18, 19, 20. I mean, I'm probably not even out of the woods yet as a 23-year-old now, but especially I think those like younger years when you're first striking out on your own, it's this particular feeling of wanting to define yourself by being different from other people. It's wanting to like cool things and have interesting hobbies and just be perceived as effortlessly fascinating, even if it's kind of a front over who you actually are, you know? And even though this is taking place in the 1990s, which is a decade in which I did not exist, I was not even an idea of a person yet, I still found a lot of it to be very resonant in this drive to carve out an identity for yourself out of the things that you don't like, out of how you're not like other girls. Because if you are exactly like other girls, then who are you? How can you be an individual if you can't differentiate yourself from the crowd? I just feel like that was captured very well in this, in a way that is impressive considering that he's writing this as a 45-year-old man, that he can really put himself back into the headspace of being very young. He also explores a lot in this book about his connection to his identity as a second-generation Taiwanese immigrant. He looks at his tumultuous but also very loving relationships with his parents through this entire era of his life, obviously his grief for his friend, and the writing is great. I think that there are lots of passages that have some pretty lovely quotes, but I only gave it a 3.5, mostly because there is just a lot going on in this book, and it's so fragmented in how it's told. Like, it's less than 200 pages, but it tries to cover a lot of ground, and I feel like not very many of the themes felt substantively explored by the end, and that gave it, as a result, less of an emotional punch for me. I feel like I kind of felt disconnected in a lot of ways from the characters that we didn't get to know very much about and from what was happening throughout the book. But then again, this book won a Pulitzer Prize, so goes to show what I know. Maybe don't take me seriously ever again. This is just my opinion. Obviously, it's a fantastic book, but seriously, it's still pretty good. It's just not my favorite memoir that I've ever read in my life. After that, I picked up a new Abby Jimenez book just for the summer, and I didn't know this going in, but it turns out that this is in the same universe still as Part of Your World and Yours Truly. Part of Your World I really liked, but Yours Truly I was kind of hot and cold on, unfortunately. There was a trope in there I really did not like, but this one I liked again. I thought this was good. Just for the Summer follows Emma, who is a travel nurse alongside her best friend slash her foster sister, Maddie, and Emma has some pretty serious trauma because of her complex relationship with her birth mother, who kind of just abandoned her over and over again, but who Emma still loves and treasures dearly. And that's pretty rare in romance novels. Like, I feel like this is maybe the first one I've read that features an avoidantly attached girly as the protagonist. That might be a lie, but it feels true. I feel like it's normally the guy, if it's anyone at all. But either way, Emma ends up meeting the man whose name is Justin, which, by the way, may be the only Justin I've seen in my entire life who is deserving of rights. Side note, if your name is Justin, we haven't met. I'm just speaking from my personal experience at this time. I'm sure that you're lovely. But Emma meets him through Reddit, of all places. Just absolute hell on earth. After Justin makes a post where he mentions that his friends have deemed him cursed because every time that Justin dates somebody and then they break up, that person immediately goes on to meet their soulmate and get married, and Justin is just left behind as the single man who keeps magically redirecting his exes towards their life partners. And it turns out that Emma has actually had the exact same experience. Like, all of her exes also immediately go on to meet their wives after they break up. So they start messaging and they come up with this plan where if they date and then after a few dates they break up, both of them will go on to meet their life partners after that. Like, their curses will cancel each other out or something. So that's what's going on inside of here. And it sounds like 10 times more convoluted than it actually is. Like, the premise of this book when you're reading it feels pretty simple and easy to understand. It's just kind of hard to explain out loud. And that's good because the dynamics inside of this book are actually fairly intense. Abby Jimenez in general writes these like saccharine sweet, tender romances. These are diabetes level couples. These are men that would never exist and walk this world inside of real life. But she writes the sweetest relationships onto backdrops that are actually quite serious. Like, real shit is going on under the surface for both Emma and Justin inside of this book. On Emma's end, she has her trauma and her terrible mom just like reappearing inside of her life to burn everything down again. And then Justin is taking custody of his 3 younger siblings for reasons that you would see more of if you read this book. But they're definitely not fun. And don't get me wrong, I mean, this is a romance novel. Like, in a lot of ways, things end up being too simple. They go too well. Like, you get a happily ever after out of this, out of a situation that in real life probably would have spontaneously combusted. But I don't read romance novels to have them end in pain and misery. And I still found this to be pretty refreshing to have characters that have like real difficult problems that would cause significant stress in their lives. In fact, one of the reasons I do read romance novels is to delude myself into believing that my real problems will not prevent me from achieving happiness inside of this life. So it's nice to see characters like Emma receiving happy endings even after they're having these ridiculously unhealthy thought patterns, you know? So I enjoyed this overall. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I liked Emma. I thought that Justin was the next flavor of the Abby Jimenez perfect man, and I will eat them up every single time, regardless of whether or not they have realistic flaws. I don't really care. And he's great. He's like a snarkier Daniel from Part of Your World. Every Abby book that I've read has felt maybe 50 pages too long, and this one was no exception to that, so there were moments that I didn't feel completely tuned into the story, but for the most part I consider those to be brain breaks, so it's honestly kind of fine. And also, this isn't a spoiler because if you read the books closer to each other than I did, you would have just known this instantly from the names of the characters, but the way that I was jump scared by how Emma is connected into the Part of Your World multiverse, like, I had to go and grab my copy of that book because I was so surprised. I had to like confirm what was going on. It was a bigger twist than most thrillers to me. Anyways, yeah, I recommend this if you want something fun that is also just serious enough to be meaningful without being so heavy that it ruins your day. Okay, it's starting to get dark. I have 2 left. I'm gonna go faster with these. After Just for the Summer, I blacked out and I read this in like 6 hours in the middle of the night like a freak. This is The Family Upstairs. It is a Lisa Jewell thriller that's about this girl who was adopted as a baby out of this really nice mansion after her parents committed suicide in what appeared to be this kind of like cultish, strange thing. It's all very mysterious, and the woman, Libby, she finds out when she's 25 that she has inherited this old mansion. But when she goes to check it out, she ends up running into somebody who knows things about her, about what happened there, about how there is more to the story than there was in the news. This should surprise nobody. This is the thriller. It's how these things go. I enjoyed None of This Is True, one of Lisa's more recent books, quite a lot actually, with the exception of how one trauma-related thing was handled. I thought that was quite bad, but overall the book was good. It was very engaging. And so I have been meaning to read more Lisa Jewell, and to her credit, I mean, I did pump through this. Like, it was good enough to absorb in one sitting in the middle of the night when I was barely sentient, but it was no better than that in my opinion. I ended up giving this 3 stars. I just didn't care about any of these people or about what they were up to. Like, it just all felt so irrelevant to me. This is a lot more family drama and like tea, except the variety of tea that involves very bad things, like very gruesome things, very adult thriller things. The things you find in adult thrillers are in here, but still, it mostly read like the tea of a family drama instead of the kind of twisty psychological thriller sort of action that I was hoping for going in. And I feel like where it went by the end was completely outlandish, but also not even interesting enough to justify how ridiculous it was. Like, it was just kind of sad and tragic in my opinion. And also, this book ends on a cliffhanger, and audaciously, it has a sequel, which I found out about after finishing this, and I hate that. Like, what do you expect? Me to read another one of these to figure out the one answer to the one question that I still have? I might do it, but I will be very mildly annoyed that I have to. And yeah, this was okay. It's nothing to write home about. It's just kind of fucked up for the sake of being fucked up with about 1.5 interesting characters. Honestly, talking about it is making me feel like it's a 2.5 instead of a 3. Who's to say? I'm not sure. Somewhere in that range. The last book that I finished this month was Going Clear, and I started this at the beginning of February, I think, and it has been an odyssey. It's been a long time since something has made me feel like my attention span is this cooked, but I got through it. I made it. This is a nonfiction book about Scientology that is not actually very interested in spending time on Scientology as a religion, like the practices and the ceremonies and the really bizarre rituals and the expensive trainings that people do to progress on this this weird alien path. The author gives you just enough context on those things to understand why it's so batshit, and then he spends the majority of the rest of the book on Scientology as an organization and as a strange celebrity haven that kind of feeds off of the particularly narcissistic stars like Tom Cruise, and also on Scientology as a foundation that its leaders use to do some pretty insane shit and get away with it. That is more so what this book is about, as opposed to unpacking doctrine and what Scientology actually is. And the best way I can describe how reading this book felt was it was like reading a really long and dense Atlantic feature. And I like the Atlantic, that's why I'm using this comparison, but 450 pages of that style of exhaustive investigative journalism where there are what feels like hundreds of different names to remember, and there's no real linear narrative because so much is happening inside of this book. Like, ambitiously, it's trying to capture basically all of it, all of the things within Scientology. It was just exhausting to read and to get through. It made me feel like my brain was eroded. But with that said, I still gave this 3 stars because I feel like this book was incredibly well researched. I feel like as a comparison, this was like eating my vegetables, except I'm 5 and I hate broccoli. You know, like the process of doing it was icky. It was tough, but I'm glad that I did because thinking about it retrospectively, there is just so much to unpack inside of here because Scientology is insane. It's ridiculous. And I knew that going into this book vaguely just because of popular culture, but I feel like I had no idea just how disturbing and vile it was. Like the child abuse and the labor camps and the boats where they just had people that were trapped for decades and could never leave. Like that's all so out of the frame of reality for me, and yet it happened. It was done. And I also did find it iconic that this book would say some crazy thing about Scientology, but then also put in a bunch of footnotes whenever that happened that were like, hey, the church denies this. The church actually refutes these allegations and the church has no idea. The church says it wasn't them. It was that guy down the street and they don't know what you're talking about, and also please stop asking. Like, of course they would never do anything wrong. It's Scientology. So true. But yeah, one of my majors in college was religion, so I've always found cults and the question of what qualifies as a religion, and especially the ways that people twist religion into suiting their personal goals and ambitions, all of that I've always found really interesting. So that's why I picked this up, and that's why I kept grinding even when I felt like my brain was going to overheat. And that's ultimately why I'm glad that I read this, because I feel like this book has given me an unlimited amount of dinner party anecdotes about L. Ron Hubbard. So not sure if I would recommend this universally, but I do feel like if you're going to like this book, you know who you are. But that's it. That's the bi-monthly wrap up. I got through 9 books this month, which is nearing my normal numbers again, so we're kind of back at it a little bit. I am thawing out my ability to read again, slowly but surely. I'm fighting another day. Unrelated, but I'm actually moving very soon. Quick lore drop, but I've actually been living with my parents since my lease ended at college in August. I went home to figure it out for a little while, and I've kind of figured it out a little bit. So this room where I do most of my filming is actually my office that I rent, so I don't go insane because the walls in my house are very thin. But the next time we talk, I might be filming partially in a new location, so that's kind of exciting. Keep an eye out for that. It'll be pretty cool. But until then, that's really all I got. If you're still here, I appreciate you. Please drop a like. Please comment the thoughts that are rattling around inside of your brain. I like knowing them. And I will see you when things are maybe 3% more settled around me in my life. We'll see. I'm figuring it out. But I love you guys. Thank you. I don't have anything else to say. Bye.